Trump himself explicitly said he does not want to be Herbert Hoover, the president that brought the world to world economic depression. Why is then he decide to, at this juncture, to restart the tariff war? Now he's going to reimpose the tariff across the globe, like including so-called U.S. ally or the European countries. Why is he doing that? Why is he even bringing that back?
I think it's a political calculus, right? So I think President Trump is actually in a very invidious political position because the policy ambitions and the policy means that have been part and parcel of his kit bag are not achieving the outcomes that he seems to want to achieve, and in fact often undermine the chances of realizing the outcomes that he seeks to achieve as well. But having made his political name on the back of tariffs as the centerpiece of Trumpian economics and the revitalization of the American economy, and as the key to the next golden age, he has no choice, again, in the lead up to midterm elections, but to not let go of his signature instruments. He can blame the courts for why the previous tariff rounds got knocked out. It's actually very convenient for President Trump to be able to do that. But by reviving them now, and they're actually relatively modest in truth, 10, 12% here and there. Nonetheless, from an optics point of view, I think it enables him to show good faith to what is actually the centerpiece of the Trump economic program. That's about it. It's unlikely to deliver on the outcomes that Trump himself seeks to achieve. We've seen this already, right? We've seen in the 12 months after Liberation Day tariffs 2025 were implemented that American manufacturing has not revived. That was the purpose. And it didn't happen. Many people were concerned about inflation. Now, it is arguable that inflation itself hasn't manifested in large part because companies absorbed some of that price impact. And we know that from surveys, in fact, that about 70% of the price impact was absorbed by importers. But more recent research suggests that it's playing out in a different way. So the adjustment that's being made in the American economy is that buyers, whether they're companies or household consumers, are buying cheaper, lower quality alternatives where they're available. So rather than prices rising per se, the actual effect on the American economy is a shift to lower quality. And that will affect, of course, the standard of living of Americans and also the productivity conditions of enterprises as they begin to import cheaper but lower quality alternatives. So these are the consequences, but much of that won't be visible for some time to come.
Yeah, you would think, with Trump's stated aim of bringing manufacturing back to the United States, he would welcome, for example, Chinese investment in U.S. to build factories. There are U.S. American manufacturers. I'm talking about Ford. I'm talking about Tesla that are now trying to manufacturing batteries in United States. But they cannot do it alone because China now dominates the car battery technology. So what Ford and Tesla is trying to do is they're trying to cooperate with the Chinese companies, particularly CATL, CATL, to bring battery manufacturing in United States. And for some reason, that's raising a lot of oppositions in Congress. And I just saw on Twitter a congressional hearing where they brought in this think tanker guy who said, Well, it's not difficult to imagine a scenario in which thousands or even millions of cars will be halted in our streets. And that could be an obvious tool for a foreign adversary. And China is certainly considering this capability. Now, what he's actually talking about, he's talking about these Chinese joint ventures with American companies, with likes of Ford and Tesla, to manufacture battery in U.S. And he's questioning, oh, what software do they use to interface with this battery? Maybe they could be hacked to shut off the power supply. What I don't understand is, like, why is there even such opposition? Who found these think tanks to check out these kind of propaganda? Because this is net positive for United States, to actually bring manufacturing back to the U.S. And I would think, with the heavyweights like the Ford CEO, like Elon Musk, they would have a lot of pull inside the Washington Beltway. But who would be opposed to this? I'm baffled. I'm completely baffled. Why would anybody kind of object to this?
Well, I mean, the think tanks are funded by Congress by and large, and they get the reports that they pay for. Trump himself, I think, has, again, it's a classic case of contradictory objectives. He made it clear when he was campaigning prior to the last election, and I think from memory he was campaigning in Detroit, where he talked about the impending bloodbath on the American auto sector should Biden or Kamala Harris be elected and Trump not be elected. And in that speech that he delivered, he also talked about being open to Chinese EV manufacturers setting up shop in the United States. So there's a part of Trump that actually understands that there is certainly industrial and employment benefits of being open to Chinese capital and know-how coming into the United States and establishing operations. The contradiction arises because you also have, pulling the other way, all of these, well, let's call them national security concerns. Whether they are real national security concerns or not, I think is a debatable question. And if they're not genuine national security concerns, and I would suggest that in many cases they're not, or that they're, at least not unmanageable national security concerns, then the real question is, well, why do these issues get the traction that they get? The comments that you reference evince to me a level of unreflective paranoia that has reached new heights, clearly ignorant of how these technologies actually work, but nonetheless fearful of anything that is related to the People's Republic of China. So why is this happening again and still? I think that there's an incredible investment politically, emotionally, and of course financially in the anti-China story. We're heading into midterm elections. We're running the anti-China, Reds under the bed, the communists are coming, they're everywhere, flag up the pole, might help galvanize the base. And when you're facing a difficult electoral situation, as many Republicans in particular are, then this is a go-to issue, right? With very little short-term downside. You'll remember about a year ago, there was also all that hyped up fear about Chinese nationals directly or indirectly buying American farmland, and how a number of states passed legislation prohibiting Chinese nationals or entities associated with them from buying American farmland. And in fact, I think in Texas, even buying other kinds of property. When you actually look at the real numbers, you'll see that in fact, Chinese ownership of American farmland is minuscule in the scheme of things. The most significant foreign investor in American farmland is actually Canadian, followed by assorted entities registered in Europe. Okay, the Chinese rank well behind, and yet the entire campaign of fear and loathing revolved around Chinese ownership of farms. So there's something clearly in the water in Washington that leads otherwise people that you would think are at least marginally intelligent. You know, they're not totally silly people. These are people who get elected to things. They're good at certain things quite obviously, but it leads them to running this sort of stuff, these lines, and taking these political positions when the evidence actually suggests that it's overrated, the paranoias are misplaced. I mean, these are the same people who argued that imported garlic was a national security threat, right? I mean, you know, let's just, you know, keep that in mind. Right? So it's kind of hard to rationalize why it is that these sorts of concerns get articulated, which leads me to ultimately conclude that these aren't rational concerns. They're mobilized for other reasons, you know, whether they're electoral reasons, whether they're deep-seated racial reasons, right? You know, that it's Chinese, therefore bad, whether it's ideological reasons, you know, the communists, whatever those reasons are, none of them actually relate to whether, in fact, the imagined downstream possible consequences are even remotely possible. Right? And when we're talking about batteries and things like that, they're not remotely possible at all. But you get this space where this crazy stuff gets run. Now, will it sustain into 2027 after the midterm elections? Well, if President Trump actually does have a serious interest, and he might not, but if he does have a serious interest in revitalizing aspects of American industry, ensuring that American industry is able to benefit from the latest of the technology frontiers, then he'll want to revisit this whole issue. I don't know whether he will, though, because as we also know, he's recently made some decisions concerning prohibitions on Chinese robotics, right? So again, there's a level. So these are the contradictions. Right? You've got Trump on the stump saying we need Chinese investors to build factories in America. Then you've got the other Trump, which is banning Chinese technologies. You've got people on the Hill talking about, you know, the risks of Chinese technologies under national security terms. No wonder American economic policy making is paralyzed, totally paralyzed, because you've got these contradictory forces at work. And until this paralysis is broken by a leadership that actually has a clear and persuasive vision for American economic structural transformation and social transformation, then I think we're going to be in this stasis for quite some time to come.
Yeah. You know, the U.S. senator that mentioned Chinese garlic is a national security threat is the senator from Florida, Rick Scott. And I just saw him before the show. I just saw him posting on Twitter. Again, this is a Senate congressional hearing where he's talking about the danger of China contributing to significant supply of antibiotics to the United States. And you know, I just decided to put a reply under his post. I'm like, yeah, you are Senator, thank you for your attention to this matter. You should immediately cut off all antibiotics supplied to the United States. You will bring great benefit to the humanity of the earth. I mean, this is just mind-boggling stuff. He is arguing, you know, there's a danger that if China decide to weaponize their control dominance of the supply chain and to cut off that antibiotic supply to the United States, this will be terrible. But what's the alternative? Are you just gonna ban antibiotics from China? I mean, like, it's crazy stuff. But as you mentioned, the recent U.S. ban on robotics, because China has now have clear dominance in the field of robotics. But when I look into the CNN article talking about the ban, the ban actually extends more than humanoid robots. It actually includes the ban also includes power converter used to connect renewable energy infrastructure and batteries to the power grid. Now, that is actually in desperate need by all these hyperscalers inside United States who are trying to build data centers, because U.S. power grid cannot support all these outgrowth of data centers. So now they're trying to build their own energy supply, their own power supply, and they do that either by building the gas turbines, and some of them, like Elon Musk, is trying to bring more renewable energy into the mix, and that needed importation of power converters, transformers, all these equipment tools they import from China. And now this ban apparently includes a power converter. So this will actually contradict the U.S. aim for AI dominance by continually build out these data centers. So I don't understand. I don't understand. You would think, like, with all the money that piling into the AI bubble right now, and with the telecom, with the Silicon Valley tech bros have a big say in Washington. How did things like this get passed? How did this kind of legislation get passed that will actually hurt their chance of increasing the U.S. energy production? I mean, like they need equipment from China. Why are you banning this equipment from China? Who thought that this is a great idea?
Look, I think all of this tells us something, right? And that is that good economic policy and what actually happens are two very different things. It tells us that there are other considerations that dominate decision-making priorities inside Washington in ways that defy economic sense. And it really points to, I think, a political elite that is driven by a series of concerns and priorities that actually don't have a lot to do with the things that matter to ordinary people and communities across the United States. It's the only conclusion that I can reach, that there is a level of political irrationality, right? And I don't mean that in a sort of a hard sense, but that there is a set of considerations or a certain kind of rationality that is more important than smoothing the way for economic development and those sorts of things. This energy stuff is a real classic case in point. This equipment, it's being banned because the scare campaign is that if they come from China, China will be able to somehow switch the energy off. Okay, that's the story, right? It's whether it's the garlic, it's the batteries in cars, it's the connectors between solar farms and data centers, what have you, right? So that's the paranoia. The problem is that without this equipment, a whole bunch of data centers won't get built. Okay, so that's actually a consequence. You can't just magic up this equipment. There's a whole bunch of other equipment and materials necessary for the electricity networks and for data centers that come from China, and there's already a waiting line for some of this stuff already. We know that some data centers have been delayed or cancelled. Okay. On top of that, data centers are sucking skilled workers, electrical workers in particular, out of the economy at a greater rate of knots than you can imagine. It desperately needs these particular skills to do the things that it needs to do. And you think, that's what happens. Well, here's the flip side. The flip side is that skilled electrical workers are now in scarce supply for the rest of the economy. The rest of the economy still needs these workers. So what happens? Well, one is that the price of these workers is going up. This is Dutch disease stuff, right? So it's being bid up by the data center system. The availability of these skilled workers is reducing, which means that the non-data center demands will either have to pay more and or wait longer for these skills, which then has roll-on effects insofar as industrial competitiveness, productivity, etc., etc. So you've got a data center system that itself is being delayed because of, quote, national security concerns, unquote, but still affecting the viability of industrial competitiveness in other parts of the economy. None of this is coherent. This is why we sit here and say, help me make sense of this. Well, the best way to make sense of this is to accept that it's incoherent. The thing to understand is, well, if that bit's incoherent, what is the rationality that makes this incoherence something that the political class is willing to live with? And it seems to me that the calculus is simple, that fear campaigns about China is viewed as a vote winner in the lead up to the midterm elections. And that's about as far as these characters go. Right? Now, when you've spent a lifetime invested, and these guys have spent a lifetime, last 5 to 10 years, invested in demonizing China, what else are they going to do? Right? They certainly can't look themselves in the mirror, and heaven forbid ask voters to take a good hard look at them and their own track records. The best thing to do is to frame someone else as being responsible for your plight. Right? There is nothing better for a politician with his or her back against the wall to find someone plausible, quote unquote plausible, to blame for the problems that these politicians themselves have caused and have no capacity to resolve. Right? So that's what we're seeing unplay in America at the moment. In a sense, it's not hard to make sense of once we stop trying to make sense of the incoherence on its terms. Economic policy in the United States is entirely incoherent. What's interesting is actually why it's incoherent.
Okay, I understand the argument that China makes an easy target, easy scapegoat, because for the longest time, for decades, escaping a scapegoat in China almost have no consequences, at least no political consequences for all these American politicians. But now as China itself becomes ever more important in the world economy, scapegoat China, hating on China, banning everything Chinese is having increasingly more real life consequences for the United States. How this is like
Absolutely. But those consequences are not being internalized yet, right? There's a catch up that has to be done yet. There's a reckoning. Reality marches on regardless, right? But reality and the consequences of reality unfolding as it's unfolding has not yet caught up with a political class that continues to milk a set of circumstances which is no longer supported by reality. And the thing is that in the United States, we have 2-year electoral cycles. 2-year electoral cycles makes it actually pretty easy to kick the can down the road. You're not kicking the can down the road 4 years or 6 years, right? As far as the cycle is concerned. You just got to kick it down the road for a couple of years. I get that senators, of course, are elected every 6 years and the presidential cycles are 4 years, right? But congressional seats are every 2 years. And so when you've got such short time horizons, you don't need to think too far beyond that. And therefore they don't. Right? Therefore they don't. And there will be a price to pay. And the price, of course, is already manifest. The price that's being paid through American political elite profligacy and a refusal to take a good hard look in the mirror at the policy settings that they've adopted over the course of the last 4 to 5 decades, a refusal to actually take a good hard look at all of that means that the root causes of American malaise are currently being ignored. American malaise is a consequence of an economic restructuring that has favored the emergence and accelerated growth of finance capital over the growth and consolidation of industrial capital domestically. And that has taken 50 years, and in fact even longer, but let's just say the last 50 years, to take a grip and ultimately work its way through the American economic and social system. 100 years ago, Carl, transatlantic discussions about capitalism in the 1910s and 1920s and into the 1930s talked about a certain persona called the rentier, or at other times called the coupon clipper, as being a symptom of an economic restructure in the very nature of capitalism, which had serious downside consequences. Whether you were a sort of a business management school educator, Burl and Means, for example, they wrote a very classic book on this stuff, or whether you were a liberal collectivist like John Maynard Keynes, a socialist like Tawney, or in fact the Marxists going back to the 1910s. They all understood that the emergence of the rentier, the separation of finance capital and its interests from the dynamics and ownership of fixed capital, factories, equipment, and those sorts of things, was a problem for capitalism, and that there needed to be an effort to bring that to heel. The Marxists, of course, saw that as part and parcel of a process by which capitalism eventually transitions. But the reformers who wanted to fix capitalism, they talked about a need to, well, Keynes talked about a need to euthanize the rentier. Okay. Come 1980 onwards, the coupon clipper, which was not a term of endearment, right? This was a term that was used to really besmirch a class of people. Come 1980 onwards, the shareholder became the embodiment of liberalism, of freedom, of the democratization of finance. It became a symbol of all things good about capitalism. So in the space of 50 years, we went from a situation where this particular phenomenon was seen in very critical terms to one in which it was embraced as the quintessential, defining feature of modern capitalism. Now, until you confront that, until you're willing to rein in the rentier or to bring Wall Street to heel, you're never going to heal Main Street. You're never going to revitalize industrial capital because the drivers and the imperatives are at odds with each other. Now, do you see anybody in the American political class who's willing to confront that problem? Right? No, of course not. Right? They've bought into the entire Kool-Aid of American shareholder capitalism. Right? For them, this is the defining characteristic of what makes America great. We hear all the talk about America's strengths in the depths of its capital markets. Well, one of the consequences of the strengths of America's deep capital markets is a hollowing out of industry. So when you cry about the hollowing out of industry, but not look at its root causes, it's important to find someone else to blame. And this is precisely what goes on. But it doesn't solve the real problem. Blaming China won't solve any of these problems that besets America today. Blaming China will not overcome the malaise that now envelops American industry, American communities, and society writ large. Right? But until either the political class can confront these problems of its own making, or is forced to reckon with the consequences of the decisions that they've made and supported over the course of the last 4 to 5 decades by those most affected by these decisions in an adverse way, then nothing's going to change. We're going to continue experiencing this kind of paralysis at a political and policy level whilst the real economy continues to hollow out and corrode. This is America against America.
Wow. Well said. Is there any other topic you would like to cover today, Dr. Powell?
Well, now that I've climbed down from the high horse, look, the world at the moment is going through, obviously, some very turbulent times. There are going to be some real, in my view, there's going to be some real pain. The question about pain is whether or not it's grasped as an opportunity for the kinds of changes that we need to make things better, or whether the pain just gets consolidated and concentrated amongst a small group of people in a small group of countries. The United States is a big and important country, but it needs to find a way of addressing the issues that I've talked about, because it needs actually to make peace with itself. And until it can make peace with itself, it is always going to be at war with the rest of the world. The challenge for the rest of the world is to understand that and protect itself when America makes war with it to the extent that it can, and try to help the United States at a broad cultural level, political level, institutional level, come to terms with the changes in the world and help America realize that it can actually be a member of the community of nations, but no longer as first amongst equals, but just as one of the normal nations that make up this world. That's the challenge we face today.
Well said. Well said. If people wish to follow you, Dr. Powell, where would they go?
Substack, warwickpowell.substack.com, and they can check out my book as well on Amazon. The book is called Thermoeconomics in a Time of Monsters.
Thank you very much, Dr. Powell, for making the time to speak to us. And thanks everyone in the audience for following along and listening. Until next time. Bye-bye.